we're going to talk about what are we talking about?
The V and the E.
Oops.
We're going to talk about, I don't know.
I'm just demonstrating.
Oh, that was good. Oh, God.
And a demonstration of vulnerability. When it comes to innovation and shaping the future, you don't need all the answers, but you do need space to think differently. We're launching a special 6-part B.R.A.V.E. Human Leadership series in collaboration with our strategic partner, the Human Leadership Institute. In this series, we explore what it really takes to lead through change, a challenge more and more leaders are facing every day. At TomorrowZone, we help leaders shaping the future of business and technology to pause, reframe, and reimagine how they move forward so that they can lead with clarity, empathy, and purpose. Are you ready to think differently? Start your breakthrough at tomorrowzone.io. And now, on to the show. Welcome to the TomorrowZone Catalyst Podcast, where we explore the future of leadership, innovation, and transformation. I'm your host, Reuben, and in this special 6-episode series, we're diving into what it really takes to lead in this rapidly changing world of ours. We're not just talking about leadership buzzwords, but we're talking about brave human leadership. This is a research-backed framework built on belonging, resilience, authenticity, vulnerability, and empathy. These are human-centered leadership skills that drive real impact, foster innovation, and create cultures where people and businesses can truly thrive. Joining me for this series is Jen Croneberger, founder and Chief Inspiration Officer of the Human Leadership Institute and a leading expert in relational leadership. Together, we're exploring the science, strategies, and stories behind brave leadership and why it's more essential now than ever. Today, we are discussing the V in B.R.A.V.E., which stands for vulnerability. So let's dive in. Jen, welcome back to the show.
Good to be here, Deb. Always. Thank you.
So vulnerability, that's a loaded word.
Yeah.
It's not something that comes up in a lot of leadership meetings that I'm in. So
no, not typically.
Yeah. Why do so many leaders struggle with this word vulnerability?
We get to take a deep breath before we get started because this is a deep one. And I think somewhere along the way, we learned that vulnerability was a weakness, that showing emotion, admitting uncertainty, even asking for help somehow makes us less capable as a leader. I think we also live in a world that praises confidence and control, right? When you're in a leadership role, there's like an unspoken pressure to always have it together, to never let people see the cracks. Remember that deodorant commercial way back in the day? Never let
them see you sweat.
Yeah, that's right. That might have been great for a deodorant commercial, but the striving for this kind of perfectly put together leader is actually hurting us. Because here's the truth. People don't connect to perfection. They connect to humanity. And vulnerability feels risky for most people because it means opening ourselves up to that humanity, to that judgment of who we are. Avoiding it, though, I think creates a different kind of risk. We see the risk of disconnection, of leading from a distance, of missing that chance to build real trust. And so maybe the real question is, instead of why is vulnerability hard, maybe the real question is what happens when we lead without it? And that's where truly I think you can do more harm than good by doing so.
So what happens when you lead without it?
The trust is such a big piece of vulnerability. I think when you're leading without it, people feel it. We think that maybe it's just kind of this outside shell thing. It's not. This goes deeper. And this is that human to human connection. I mean, we've all known leaders who kind of stand at a distance, and not just physically, but figuratively as well, right? They stand at a distance from their people because, oh no, I can't get too close, or I can't let them see me as a human being. And the detriment to that is that people then don't feel that connection. They don't build that trust with you because, right? I mean, I don't trust people that, can't connect with me. I feel like that there's this shields that they have up. And, especially on a team, when your leader is just kind of a figurehead, so to speak, that's where you get into the idea that, leaders aren't just a title or a role. Leaders are behaviors. Leaders are the things that they do. It's how they show up. And so this idea of vulnerability is, it's the human side of leadership. This is where it gets real. This is where we are allowed to, say how we feel and let other people know, like, yeah, I'm struggling with that too. If you ever had a leader say that, I mean, that's powerful stuff. Then it's like, oh, so I'm not expected to be perfect because they're not either. And that's the idea. And when we get there, people will go through a wall for you because they feel the connectedness, they trust you, they know you have their back. And therefore that gives them such an edge to be able to perform.
Yeah, actually, thinking about that, when you are working on things that are high stakes and you're taking risks.
Yeah.
If you cannot trust that your leader has your back, you're heading for a lot of trouble.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what are some of the bigger misconceptions about vulnerability and leadership?
So I think there's a lot. There's a lot of these like myths of, that kind of keep leaders from fully stepping into their most authentic, which we talked about last time, connected selves. And I think the first one is that vulnerability is weakness, like I mentioned. I think, in reality, it takes far more courage to be open and real than to hide behind a facade of control. Think about it. It's easy to just kind of put the wall up. Vulnerability isn't about falling apart, being this weak kind of, person that just is sharing every possible thing they possibly can in negativity. It's really about kind of standing in truth. It's a powerful thing, even when it's uncomfortable. It takes real strength to be vulnerable, probably more than it takes to be, a rock that has no emotion. That doesn't really take much. Anybody could probably do that. I think that the second one is, that people believe that being vulnerable means oversharing. Vulnerability isn't about dumping emotions or sharing every personal detail. It's about being intentional about how we connect, creating space for real conversations. I hear that a lot. People like, I don't share my personal life at work. No one asked you to. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the vulnerability of your humanness, letting people actually see that instead of, putting these walls up to make yourself look strong. And then I think that the third one, if I could think about another one, would be that leaders can't be vulnerable and strong at the same time. And I've heard that argument a lot, actually, just in a couple of conversations on LinkedIn recently, where people were kind of like, "No, I don't think you can." I'm pretty sure you can. The best leaders are both. They hold the vision, they make the tough decisions, and they lead with clarity, but they also know when to say, I don't have all the answers, but I'm here to figure it out with you. And I think that's key, is that we're not expected to know all the answers. I think some people feel like they are, but truly, if you're real, you're not ever going to have all the answers, and that's okay. I think being vulnerable is allowing yourself to even say those words. I don't have all the answers. I think the most powerful leaders aren't the ones who don't struggle, right? Because that's real. That's everyday life. Things happen. But I think they're the ones that allow their teams to see that the struggle is kind of part of the journey, that, that's okay, that things are going to happen and we're going to get through it together.
I just keep thinking as you're talking about how much courage
Yeah.
plays into this to actually show up with vulnerability, and that it is both, you know, standing in your truth with strength,
Yeah.
and just how much strength that brings to a team. I'm curious, what are some examples of what it looks like when a leader effectively shows up this way or effectively models vulnerability? Do you have any examples or stories from your practice?
Yeah. So, I can think about a couple different things and then I'll kind of share a way that I've seen it. I think, just as we were talking about, I think vulnerability looks like a leader who can own their mistakes instead of covering them up, being real about it. Like, hey, I got that wrong. And here's what I'm learning. That's such a powerful example, right? For your people to actually be able to do the same. It also shows up like asking for help. Too many leaders believe they have to do it all by themselves, right? It's I have to know this and I have to get it done and it's me, me, me. But strong leadership is about collaboration, not isolation. And I think that that's such a critical piece of this, being able to own your mistakes, ask for help, but also, sharing challenges without placing burdens. This is another kind of thing that I see. You can acknowledge the tough moments without making your team feel responsible for fixing them. So you're not putting the burden on them to fix it. I think what you're sharing the challenge, and that creates what we always talk about as psychological safety. It creates that space for others to be vulnerable too. And when a leader is willing to show up authentically, it gives everyone else that permission. And the impact is huge. I think, and this, obviously, talking about innovation and, everything that you have to be able to do to do that is really in the hands of trust, right? It's like people, a culture where people feel safe to take risks, to speak up, to show up fully because they know that their leader does too. So an example, I remember I was working for a company that was getting acquired, and this was way back when I was in my 20s. There was this fear of the unknown, obviously, right? Will we still have a job? What was going to happen? And I had one boss who kind of took the strong road. He had that shield up. It was like, it's business as usual. We're fine, he kept saying, right? And while I think he meant well, it didn't feel good. Most people kind of avoided him during that time because they didn't want to feel like they were crazy for feeling what they were feeling. He almost made it seem like nothing's wrong. What's the matter? It was like, are you in the same place that we are? Because this is weird. There was
a huge disconnect.
Huge disconnect. And I think he believed that it would be better to just, hey, let's just keep, it's business as usual. Let's keep going. We're fine. Everything's going to be okay. And like I said, I think he meant well. It didn't feel good. And we had another boss in the department who actually took time to meet with us, answer what he could. Obviously, there were things he didn't know or couldn't say, and that was fine. But it didn't preclude him from listening. He was able to kind of sit with us, give us space for our fears and uneasiness. And I think what really struck me in that whole process was that he was able to say that he had some fear too, and that we'd get through it together. And he said, look, it's all the unknown right now. And that can be hard and that can feel bad. And it's okay because we're going to do this together. He allowed us to see his humanness in that moment. And two different approaches, to be honest, one worked, one totally didn't. I think that was I go back to that often in my mind because I think about what that felt like to live through that and watch that kind of play out. And I think it was really then that I really understood what kind of leader I wanted to be and what kind of leader I didn't want to be, because I knew how it affected me. And I recognized, that you get so much further. I mean, the team that he was leading, that he was sitting with and paying attention to and listening to, I mean, we wanted to go through a wall for this guy. And I would have. Absolutely 100%. The other one, I could care less. he didn't obviously care about how I felt or how the team felt. So for me, it was kind of like the less I have to talk to you, the better right now. And that's a big difference, right? So, and it's small behaviors. It's the little things of saying, you know what, I'm gonna lean into this because this is what you're feeling, and you know what, I'm feeling it too, and it's okay. I mean, there's so much value in that, so much beyond just getting us through that time. It stuck with me.
Yeah. Obviously. I'm listening to this and I'm just thinking of how often this actually does come up.
Yeah.
A lot of the work we do is in the finance industry, and that is a world where people don't often ask for help. There is this
so true
sort of unwritten expectation, the unspoken pressure that you mentioned earlier that, you have to know all the answers.
Right.
You have to know everything. I see this in tech as well, where people, show up with this pressure that they place on themselves, or maybe it's not explicit, but the leader is behaving in a way that you feel like you have to know all the answers and it's not okay to ask questions.
Exactly.
Definitely not okay to have any of the answers questioned.
Right.
And that flies in the face of innovation and exploration and experimentation, where that's all about stretching the boundaries. But if you cannot create that space
right
where it is safe for people to behave in that way, then
it's not gonna happen.
Demanding from on high that your people be innovative, that is just not going to happen.
No, that doesn't work that way. Yeah.
No, and I see it play out in even the most basic things, like you're implementing new software. I've seen some leaders, we're just going to rip the Band-Aid off and everybody's just going to go live on this new system and just shut up and get with the program. And you know what?
No.
Yeah, I've never seen that work.
No, it doesn't. It just doesn't, because
and then you keep all your people.
Correct. Yeah, exactly.
I worked with one leader and he said, Deb, it's not just about getting your team to the top of the mountain. It's about getting them back down safely together, all intact.
Oh, that's huge. Yeah.
And so I think that this vulnerability plays a huge role in the success of teams when they're taking on massively transformational challenges. But also, I think it's a survival skill of the day, because I just think of all the things that are going on, right now. And, in futurist practice, you don't just look at what's going on in technology and innovation. We also look at what's going on societally.
Yeah, absolutely.
Politically, economically, environmentally, all of these forces of change are affecting all of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
All the time. But it also seems like, change is not slowing down.
Right.
It's probably the slowest it's ever going to be today.
Right, exactly. Yep.
And so if you understand that, then I think vulnerability plays a huge role in being able to navigate that, because we're faced with continual uncertainty. I was just in an innovation event recently, and they were talking about, how this is the age of max uncertainty. They're calling it VUCA max.
Wow.
Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. That's VUCA.
Yeah. That's amazing.
And we're at maximum levels of that right now. And how do you get through that? And, really the only way you can is to embrace, what? I don't know all the answers, and neither does anybody else.
Exactly. That's the key.
Now we have a shared starting point to take on the future.
Yeah. And that's real. It's the fact that no one has all the answers should kind of, suppress that need to always be right, because nobody is. And that's okay. And you don't want to be. Really, if you're really, striving to move forward and to push things into what's next, there has to be some moments where you're going to try things that just aren't going to work.
Yeah. And that's kind of humbling too. I think that humility probably plays a role in all of this.
Absolutely, for sure.
So how can leaders balance this type of transparency with professionalism? You mentioned it isn't about oversharing, and sometimes we see that as kind of cringy. And people don't feel awesome when that's happening either.
Right, yeah. No, definitely not.
Yeah. So where's the balance?
So I think there's a fine line between this idea of being transparent and vulnerable with, I don't know, I'll call it unloading, right? It's like, boom, I'm going to take all my stuff and just give it to you, and I think that's where this idea of maybe discernment comes in. Number one, know your audience, right? I think that's probably the first step. Being vulnerable with your leadership team may look different than maybe with your entire company. The key is to share in a way that builds trust, not uncertainty for your ability to lead. And then also be clear about what you need. If you're sharing a challenge, frame it in a way that invites solutions and collaboration instead of just expressing frustration, right? It's not about that. I don't want to just, rant about how awful things are. That's not the idea of vulnerability. The idea of vulnerability is saying, hey, I have a challenge I'm dealing with right now, and let me kind of lay this out there and let's see if there are solutions that you might have, ways that you can help me with this. And then, keeping your team's, I think, emotional burden in mind, like we were just talking about. I think, vulnerability is powerful, but it's not about making your team carry that weight. It's really, you're going to share what's real, but don't hand them the pressure, right? Which we talked about. It's that pressure that I think comes up a lot in this idea of vulnerability. It's taking that pressure and moving it to the side and saying, no, that's not necessary. That's not what we need in doing this. And I think you can tie vulnerability to growth. Transparency isn't just about acknowledging hard things. It's about showing up when you're moving forward, showing how you're moving forward, showing where you're moving forward, what you're learning. Because I think the team then can learn from that and can navigate those challenges together. You don't have to be an open book, so to speak. You just have to be a real book.
Ooh,
I think that
was beautiful.
I don't know where I just pulled that, but it's, I think it's like, we look at people as they're either just this big open book and things just fly out of it, or they're not. And I think there's something in between. I think there's an opportunity to just kind of be real, but still allow yourself to be seen without having to, throw everything out at someone. I think that's probably the best way to look at vulnerability in, a professional setting.
I'm thinking about teams that we work with, and if somebody really wanted to practice this, maybe they're not the leader, but they're a part of the team and they want to grow themselves. What's one way that they could start to kind of take some steps to build this superpower?
I think again, being able to kind of dip your toe in the water and try this out. It might be beneficial to find someone else on the team who you might want to practice with. Find an accountability partner, so to speak. That people find that to be easy. So maybe you find a vulnerability partner where, you kind of take a minute with each other. And especially, if you're knee deep in a project or whatever, one of the things that I think can be really valuable is to just share, what's one thing you're afraid of going wrong here? And just sharing that, it doesn't mean it's going to, but imagine if it was like, this is my biggest fear. And then the other person, well, this is my biggest fear. And then you're listening to each other saying, oh, wow. Okay. I had no idea you were feeling like that, because I am too. And that makes me feel better. Right. We just have this ability to then hold space for each other instead of, again, I think we go through so many of these moments where we have the shield up and we have to be perfect, even with our peers, right? We have to know the answers. We have to be the one that rises above. But do we? Where does that get us? Is that really what we're striving for? Or are we striving for, hey, let's collaborate and let's do this thing together and take that pressure off of each other? And I think that could be a first step, is finding someone to kind of go back and forth with. It's an easy check-in. Hey, how are you today? How you doing really? Right? That's one of my favorite questions. How are you doing really? and allow people to be like, you know what? Not good. I'm frustrated because this happened and now I have this. And, it's not a vent session, but it's an opportunity to just show up in real life with someone else where there's no judgment back and forth because you're going to do the same. Right. So it's an opportunity to be real and to be genuine. And, what you're doing there too is you're now building this trust between two peers on a team, and you're building this authentic connection, which inspires collaboration, builds trust, which innovation can't happen without, right? And I think, just doing small little things like that, pair up, and then maybe rotate, and then you learn someone else, right? So it's, even just small things that could take 30 seconds. We're not adding something to the day, right? It's just, finding questions that you can ask each other to get to that vulnerable spot.
So powerful.
Yeah.
And thinking about just, in the work we do, a lot of times we're guiding teams through massively transformational, technology upgrade, process upgrade, basically business operations upgrade.
Yep.
And you never get through that without some major impacts on the people that are involved. In fact, I find that a very small percentage of those initiatives actually the issues that come up are rarely purely technical.
Right.
The thing I was thinking about though is how in those moments where people are transparent about their fears and their concerns, those are the moments where we find the most transformational breakthroughs.
Absolutely.
In terms of helping people adopt the change. And I was just imagining, what if we took a team through a brave human leadership approach before kicking off a big implementation project? What if, as you were going through a wicked, tricky system overhaul or new technology implementation or an upgrade or something, but all of your team members were armed with these skills to be able to navigate all of the uncertainty that is definitely going to come in the midst of it. Nobody on the tech side, nobody on the business side knows all the answers to everything.
That's right.
There are some things you can only find out once you get to those steps in the process. It's kind of like the Indiana Jones scene where the steps are showing up as he takes
as
them.
You're going.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
No, but if you have this skill of vulnerability and you can create that safe space where I can share my concerns, you can share your concerns, and we're not going to judge each other that we have those concerns because they're real. But by sharing them, those can create breakthrough ideas that can shape the future of how that project rolls out and how the people are able to successfully adopt the change and imagine what their new world is going to be in that future state. So there's a lot of power to this.
Condensing timeframes too.
Absolutely. Yes.
This can go a lot quicker if you're connected stronger.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Like, what if we could strengthen the people before we start pushing them through a journey like this? Oh my gosh.
Imagine what that looks like.
Oh, I would love the opportunity to take a forward-thinking team through something like that.
Absolutely.
Because, it doesn't have to be an anxiety-filled drama fest. It really doesn't.
No, it really doesn't.
Often it is. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox.
I love it.
So, great. I mean, we were kind of talking about it a little bit, but I did want to dive into the question about how vulnerability relates to driving innovation. But I want to relate that specifically to what's going on in the world in terms of AI, because AI, I believe, is going to become like electricity. It's going to be like, oh, you're using AI, big deal.
Right.
I expect to. Just like you walk into a room, you expect there's a switch on the wall where you can turn the lights on. We don't even think about it.
Yep.
I think that's where it's going.
Yep.
We're not there yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But,
I think you're right.
There's a lot of uncertainty surrounding it. And, frankly, a lot of fear, a lot of hype, craziness, and just really fast-paced change. So how does vulnerability play into that part of innovation? As we're looking at an AI world.
Yeah, you bring up a good point too. It's like we're before the expectation, like you said, right? We're just before that. So we're seeing it from a lens of what will that look like? And I think, when you're talking innovation is built on risk taking, right? I mean, really, you can't take risks if you're afraid to fail, because that's not going to work and you're not always going to get it right. So I think when leaders can create a culture where vulnerability is welcomed, where it's safe to say, I don't know, but let's try, right? That opens the door to that kind of creativity and bold thinking. And really, you can't have vulnerability without trust. And I think we're in this space, like you're talking about, where we have to be able to trust also the movement forward, right? We're trusting kind of taking that next step because we have the safe space to be able to say, I don't know, but let's try, right? So I think, the trust piece is such a big element here moving forward. But I think innovation probably, as we're talking about this and as I'm thinking about it, you think about how it thrives and where it thrives. And it thrives in environments where mistakes are learning opportunities instead of punishments. I've seen that too often, where we made a mistake and someone's paying for it instead of, oh, we're learning from this mistake and how do we move forward with new knowledge, right? It also thrives, and I think this definitely applies to, where AI is going is where curiosity is encouraged over perfection, over, that kind of shield that we're talking about. People feel safe to challenge ideas, to bring new perspectives, without being vulnerable. We're going to play it safe because isn't that what we do, right? We're going to kind of step back a little bit and say, oh, I don't know about that. And I think you're seeing that a little bit when we're talking about AI. People are a little bit not sure,
Yeah,
but I think
definitely hesitance.
Yeah, of course. And that's, again, it's the fear of the unknown. It's like, I don't know how this is going to go. So I'm a little afraid because I don't know. We stick to what's comfortable, right? But when we have vulnerability in place and we're understanding that we can kind of lean into that and be safe leaning into that, now we can push boundaries. We can't do that if we don't feel safe. It's kind of like, you're kind of leaning on, if you ever go somewhere and you're like leaning on a rack and you don't realize it has wheels. It's like, I just did that the other day in a store. That's why I was thinking about it. And I like leaned on it and it started going. I was like, whoa, oh, that's a problem. Because I didn't know that. Right. So I'm like,
That's the equivalent of walking into a glass door.
Pretty much. Yeah. So pushing boundaries, so to speak, right? When we embrace that vulnerability, though, it creates that space where people want to take risks. They want to stretch beyond their limits. And by doing that, we do our best work. And I think that's where, and like you said, it requires courage, right? Real innovation requires courage, and courage requires vulnerability. And none of that can happen outside the hands of trust. And I think that's where we're sitting right now as we're moving into this space of AI becoming more prevalent and in our everyday lives. I think this is where we're sitting, and it's our opportunity to push those boundaries, but we have to have that trust and vulnerability to do so.
So let's kind of close this out. For leaders who might be afraid to be vulnerable, what's one small act that they could try today to show up in a different way?
When it feels uncomfortable, this is the opportunity to just do one little thing, right? We don't have to change the whole world in one day. But I would say maybe starting out with acknowledging one thing that you don't have an answer to. Maybe you acknowledge it with your team. Maybe it's with a peer. Maybe it's just with yourself. But practice saying, I don't know yet. Because here's the truth. Leadership is never and should never be about having all the answers, but it's always about being willing to figure it out together. And the goal is always to surround yourself with people who are smarter than you, right? The people who may have the answers to questions you didn't even know to ask. The more you lean into that, the stronger your leadership becomes. And that has to take vulnerability in order to get there.
Awesome. Jen, thank you so much for sharing your insights on brave human leadership. So great to have you back. For our listeners, what resonated with you? What's one thing that you're taking away from this conversation that you can apply in your day-to-day? Let's keep the conversation going. You can connect with us on LinkedIn. You can visit TomorrowZone.io or explore Jen's work at the Human Leadership Institute. If you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to subscribe, share it with a colleague, and until next time, stay curious and choose to make awesome happen.